All right, so I thought it'd be a good idea to go through the process of how I clean images. I go through the painstaking process of really cleaning them up for every one of them. Some people tend to skip that, and you could try to clean them up in post, but I tend to find this just works better when training models. So here's an example of an image I usually have. Again, these are pulled from like various websites, Pinterest, whatever. This one happens to be really high res, and so the first thing I would say is like, because we don't know where GANs are going to go in the future, if you're making a data set, like keep them as high resolution as you can until like the last couple steps before you actually produce your data set. Because if you scale this down first and then like edit it, and then like, if let's say in like a year or two, like now we're doing double the resolution, you don't want to do this work twice. So try to keep everything as high resolution as you can. I tend to just like save them as a PNG, and then like save them to like a hard drive so I have them later, but then I'll go through and use my dataset tools to like resize them and whatever. So this isn't really about that, but let me just show you like how I clean images. So also, before I get started, there's like a couple of things to think about here, which is one, I tend to crop things to like a specific sort of ratio, and usually that's on a per dataset basis or on a per image file basis. That way they're all pretty consistent. As you might have seen, like if you get stuff that's in weird shapes and sizes, you have to do other things of formatting. So the first thing I do is I always use a similar cropping system. So for this particular data set, I've been using a width of 3 and a height of 4 for the ratio. It's not perfect for every one of these images, but it allows me to crop that in. So in this case, you can sort of see what happens with that crop. So yes, I'm using Photoshop. I hope you have Photoshop. If you don't, there are other tools out there. They probably won't be as nice, but you can still get away with using this. The next thing that I want you to know about is that there's a bunch of tools in here that I use very frequently, and they are not easily accessible, like with a simple key command. So for example, the crop tool, I don't even know if the crop tool originally had a key command, but I sort of mapped a key command inside of the Photoshop tools. In preferences, I don't actually even know where it is anymore. You can probably Google that better than I can find it. But essentially, I mapped the crop tool, which is one I use very often. And then I also mapped the, and that's about what I'm going to show you next. There is a edit content aware fill. So we'll talk a little bit about content aware fill when we get to it. But this is another one where like it didn't have a mapping, so I just created a really crazy key command in here. Now the deal is you don't have to memorize that key command for yourself. The deal is use this thing called Better Touch tool. So someone told me about this, and basically what it does is, if you're on a Mac at least, it adds additional tools into your touch bar. So I'll quickly show you what that looks like on my touch bar since I can't do a screencast. But here's what it looks like. So I have mapped on the left is the crop button, and on the right is the content aware tool. So basically, like, I've got these little buttons here now, so instead of having to remember all those crazy key commands, I just tap those buttons, and I use them like pretty much for every image I use, so that way they're like really easily accessible. So the deal is, with like, you want to try to find a way to like cut little corners here and there and like reduce your cognitive overhead, as well as just like save yourself 5 seconds per image, and like that adds up over time, especially if you're going to do a lot of this like I do. Okay, so now that I've talked about all that, let's get into actually how it would work here. So here's an image I have. There's a couple ways to start. The first thing is like, I know I don't want this text, so I'm going to use the brush, and there is a spot healing brush, which I believe uses the content aware if you select it here. So content aware, for those of you not familiar, sometimes people ask me if that is a machine learning tool, and it is not in many cases. Photoshop's content aware is just kind of like a catch-all for a lot of like cool tools they use. Most of it uses a thing called patch match, which you can look up and actually find. You actually find the algorithm for how it works, and it's just like really greedy, but it does a good job. Anyway, so I'm using the content aware brush. I'm just sort of like scraping over the text, and I know it will delete it. One thing I have a recommendation for is with the content aware tool, if you're going to use it, try to keep, in most cases, the edges of the content aware like shape matter. So in many cases, I try to keep it pretty small, especially if I'm going to do, like if I'm going to actually go in here and edit some of these, like let's say I want to edit out this particular little thing here. Also, if you're not aware, the control click or 2-finger click will help you change the size here. You want to make it no bigger than the actual thing you're trying to edit, because otherwise it can, like, you can start to see edges, that sort of thing. So I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to clean up a little bit more. So I'm just going to clean out all the text. The reason I do this is because that text never goes through again well. It just always comes out kind of messy. If I get really picky, I will like start to clean up some of these little spots. Most of the time I find they don't actually make it through the GAN, but it's just helpful to clean it up. Okay, so that cleans up sort of like some of the spot areas. You'll see here that I have this like band of like color, right? This is where the book like folds in or whatever. So I want to get rid of that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the lasso tool. I just use the geometry, whatever one. And then you just want to like sort of grab that space. One thing I recommend, again, with these patch match / content aware fill tools, the edges matter. So like you don't want it rubbing up against one of these flower or the leaves because it'll actually do some funky stuff. But basically, I've got this shape here now. I'm going to go ahead and click that content aware tool button that's on my touch bar. And this one came out pretty clean. I might try to do a video and an example of what happens when this doesn't come out clean, but in this case it came out pretty clean. The way this works is the algorithm sort of like looks for similar edges and then tries to mirror or match a lot of the like image that it finds. In this case, you know, I grabbed a lot of that like clean paper texture and it was able to sort of map probably the other side of the page or other elements, other areas of this page to know that it was sort of it should clean that up. Now you will notice it's a little more yellow. One way to fix that is to remove other places where there's yellow. So I bet I can clean this up a little bit more if I come up here. So anything in green is what it's sampling from. So if I remove this from the sampling possibilities, I'm gonna let it spin a little bit. Sometimes it takes a while. Don't know that I actually cleaned up. Let's remove the yellowish color from the bottom as well. Okay, I don't know that it'll help too much, but it's worth a shot. Sometimes that'll clean up some of these edges. I'm also noticing here that if I actually just look at where I sampled from, I didn't really sample too much of this right here, so it's probably just catching that little bit of yellow here. But this is still better than what I had before. And that's sort of the important thing, is that you want better. Remember that a GAN is going to generalize a lot of this stuff, and you're probably going to lose a lot of these details anyway. So as long as they're better, I mean, this isn't like a photo retouching masterclass or anything. As long as it gets better, you're in the right direction. So let's hit yes there. Okay, so I've now cleaned up this entire image. The next thing to do is just to crop it to the right size. So I go ahead and click on this guy, which I think it's M. I have mastered a lot of these key commands, so I don't even think about it. So if you hit M and then you drag out your shape here, so you'll see this shape doesn't really fit perfectly. The other thing I try to do is I try to mirror left and right and top and bottom size. So like, you know, from here to here, it's a little bit bigger than from here to here. I just eyeball it, doesn't really matter that much. So that's about good there. Then I'm gonna go ahead and on my touch bar, just click that crop tool, and then I have it. Now, obviously I do this much faster when I'm not trying to explain what I'm doing, but this is a really quick example of, you know, how you can do this. Now, one thing I'm also noticing here is I've got a lot of space still left around this, so I'm gonna crop in a little bit tighter. Tighter crops are probably a little bit better, just because like when you squish this down and run it through a GAN, like it's gonna want to remember, you know, you want as much detail of actual image you want as you can. So I'm just gonna center this and hit crop again. Cool. So now I'm just ready to save this out. I save these out as PNGs. I usually just stick them all in a folder of the same kind. I would also probably put this in a folder that gives me all the dimensions. This particular data set or this image collection has some that are horizontal, some that are vertical, so I would probably like stick it in a folder that said 3x4 just so I knew what I had. Same as PNGs, because that's like uncompressed but like still like good quality. Yes, they'll be a little bit bigger, but I like to save them out as PNGs or JPEGs at the very, very end using the Dataset tools library. All right, so that was that one image. Normally I can do this in a couple minutes, but when I talk through it, it takes a bit longer. I do this for pretty much every image. This is the process. Now in these cases, like this is silhouetting, so it's a little bit easier. If you have images that are photographs and you want to like sort of mess with them, or change the crop or shape or pad them. The content aware tool does work really well, but you have to play with it a little bit more. So maybe I'll do another video just on how the content aware tool works with something that's a little bit more complex. But for now, this is the process I go through. Hopefully it helps you understand what you could do, or maybe you can think about how to automate this. A lot of my GAN friends do make fun of me for doing this because they think you could run this through a pix-to-pix network and have it clean it up. I personally haven't found that to work that well, but to each their own. So that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions. Thanks.